being here. I'm going to ask a longtime supporter of our program, Melanie Sturm, to please come up and to introduce our wonderful speaker.
Thank you, Alan, not only for that introduction, but for all you do to bring all the great speakers here this summer. I'm delighted to introduce the one who's going to be speaking to you momentarily, John Medved. We first met on my son Zane's bar mitzvah trip to Israel in June of 2016. Being a business-minded family, in addition to wanting to tour all the major sites of Israel, we also wanted to understand this phenomenon of the startup nation. So stopped off at our crowd's headquarters, where he's CEO, and he gave a presentation that didn't disappoint, and we've been investors in Israeli startups through our crowd ever since. The other reason I think it's important, his presentation, is because I'm sure, like you, I am tired of Israel always being on the defense. We are defending against false narratives, blood libels, when in fact Israel and Israelis are the personification, in fact, of this concept, this mandate of the Jews to be Or LaGoyim, a light unto nations. And Israeli technology is literally enhancing and saving millions, if not billions, of lives daily through your iPhone, through operating room technologies, cures for cancer. He'll be talking more about that. And it's also the reason why Arab countries see Israel as central to not only their ability to provide peace and security and prosperity to their people, but to the greater Middle East. And so Israel, and John is going to talk about this, Israel has been the beneficiary just in this first half of this year. Investment in Israeli startups is up 36% compared to the first half of last year. And smart money is flowing in large measure because of this man and what he is doing to help Startup Nation. So it's my pleasure to introduce John Medved.
Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Alan. Thank you all for coming. I understand that it's tough in this town because there's so much going on. How did I know that Aspen is the place where I would come? And literally, this is now my third event. Only the first one I'm speaking at. I was also present last night with Melanie, who's here tonight, and her husband Josh. Spectacular, Melanie. And of course, I will report back to my wife, which is the most important part of it. I'm going to go through some slides and use what's left of my voice, and I apologize for the rasp, but that's, I guess it's going to be okay with amplification. And I want to cover what's going on in Israel on the economic front generally, but most specifically about startups and technology, and how are we doing? You know, this was the source of so much pride and excitement for the last 10, 20, even, I dare say 30 years. I've been in the business for 40 years in Israel. We've been whacked by the war. The whole country. I'm collecting the water and putting it right here. I've got one warm and one cold. This has not been simple, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about where are people putting the money and how is the economy doing. We'll talk about where the technology investment area is going, and then I'll be happy to talk a little bit about Israel and our Arab neighbors in the Gulf, and then we'll take some questions and hopefully engage in a discussion. So since the clicker's not working, you are my virtual clicker. You have been clicked. So just a background on our crowd. When Melanie and family, Zach, showed up, we were a couple of years into this project. And the idea was to create an online platform which allows literally someday, hopefully, millions of people to connect to startups and to invest money the way that you would in a stock. So if you were looking, for example, at a very interesting food tech or med tech or AI company, but they're not yet public, how do you invest in it? And the answer is, You don't. Unless you're a connected person in Silicon Valley, you know somebody, your son-in-law is an MIT graduate, your daughter is a brilliant researcher, at Stanford, then maybe you get to do that. You can't call your broker even at Goldman or Morgan and get a deal. So we said, let's go open this up to everybody. And so we built this platform, run from Jerusalem. Today we have about 250,000 people who are utilizing our platform. We manage about $2.5 billion of investor assets. And we've invested in about 500 different companies and about 60 different funds. And our headquarters is proudly in Israel, but we're a global factor. And we're very proud of the fact that we're doing it in Israel. More than half of our companies that we invest in are Israeli companies. So when the war broke out on October 7th, everything changed. Except maybe not everything. The media starts to call. And I'm sure Melanie got her share of calls to go appear. I get different calls. Usually my calls are CNBC or Bloomberg, CNN, do a lot of Richard Quest. And they said, come on the air and explain what this is going to mean, for Israel's economy. And I know this slide back and forth, which is a slide that shows what happens to the Tel Aviv stock market as a result of war, with Hamas in particular. And if you look at this slide, you'll see that those green arrows are where there are very, very precipitous drops. When Israel goes to war, as we would expect, stock market goes down, except that it only goes down for a matter of weeks and then goes firing up and exceeds where it was before the war in a matter of months. And so I predicted this. I went on the air and said, this is what's going to happen. The shekel is going to go down, the stock market's going to go down, but based on prior data, it's all going to come back. Now, I did one thing really wrong. I didn't bet on it properly. Next time, join me, let's bet on this. I didn't give advice. I wasn't telling people what to do, but I just I went out and made a little bit of a bold prediction. Well, let's see what happened. So look at the dollar. You see in that red paragraph, I'm sorry they're so small here, hard to see. You'll see that went right down October 7th, and then now it's back exactly as where it was at that time. It's come down in the last couple of days. And this, by the way, is data from yesterday. And then you can look at the stock market. You'll see the stock market's up about 15% since the war. But the war isn't since the war. We're still at war. So go figure how Israel has been fighting this way and our stock market is performing this way. Now, the reason, by and large, is the strong resilience in the economy as a result of the tech economy. Israeli tech is a miracle for the Jews, a miracle for Israel, a miracle for the world. And if you look at the fact that there are now 430 multinationals operating in Israel, people like Intel and Google and Microsoft, they're all there. When you look at the fact that literally almost 20% of our GDP is due to tech, when you look at the fact that 50% of our exports are tech, that approaching about 15% of our workforce is a tech workforce. One of the great numbers, by the way, I love this factoid. There are more tech workers in Israel than the entire Silicon Valley, San Francisco Bay Area. And that's not exaggeration or some kind of propaganda point. Go to Google, go online, ask questions of how many tech workers there are in Israel, how many there are in the San Francisco Bay Area. You'll see that not proportionally, but in absolute terms, there are more, over 400,000. Next slide. Now, Israel is very connected to what goes on in the world in terms of investment. Now, I'm not sure that you're aware that there's a private investment market, which is venture capital. It's the stuff that we do. And then these companies, as they mature, they go public. And we look very carefully at what's going on in the dollar flows in the private market. And you'll look at these charts and you'll see that these are annual charts. And you'll see that in 2021, things peaked. And on the right side, it's Israel. And on the left side, it's global. And they follow each other slavishly. In other words, as the global markets go up, Israel goes up, and they've come down dramatically in the last 2 years. So literally about 60, 70% has come down in terms of investment in private markets. But Israel actually, next slide, has started this rebound wildly this year that Melanie spoke about in her excellent introduction. And it's remarkable. So there was, in the month of May this year, $1.5 billion invested in Israeli private companies. Next slide. In the second quarter, which is April, May, and June, the total was almost $3 billion. And next slide. It's basically showing that we're going to be online for about $10 billion this year of investment. Now, if you can compare that to how much money is sent as charity, and by the way, the US and World Jewry performed admirably. They've sent over $1 billion in the wake of this war, but $10 billion will be invested in Israeli tech. And that goes to create jobs, to create taxes, which buy airplanes and pays for our education, pays for everything. Because without this tech, Israel wouldn't be Israel. There'd be no economy the way that we know it today. And so it turns out that the good companies, the big companies, are doing very well, really well. But the little guys, the small ones who are supposed to be the next crop of companies that will become something important, they are not doing so well. So this article here talks about literally a tale of two tech economies. You've got the good guys and the ones who are not doing it so well. Next slide. Now, there's this company, Wiz. Have you heard about Wiz? Over the last couple of weeks, what a story. This company does cybersecurity, which is Israel's strongest suit, right? If you want to say, what is Israel known for around the world in terms of technology, it's fighting all the bad people who want to steal your money, and who are doing so actually more successfully than ever before. Turns out that of the investment dollars that are put into cybersecurity globally, over 50 cents of the investment dollars go into Israel. Literally the majority, more money than invested in the US in cybersecurity is invested in Israel. So Wiz is a cybersecurity company. What makes it amazing is it's only 3 years old. It's got $500 million of revenue, hoping to get to $1 billion by the end of this year, and raised money early in the year at a $12 billion valuation. They raised $1 billion. 2 months after this raise was done, it was revealed that Google is going to buy them, not at $12 billion, but at $23 billion in the largest ever acquisition to be made by Google. And then within a week of that notice, the team at Wiz said, no, thank you. That's in Spanish, is cojones. Okay, this is, or chutzpah. These guys turned down $23 billion Now, some other investors are asking questions, some are not, okay, but they believe that they can drive it harder. All the kol hakavod, as we say in Hebrew, all the power to them, because I think that this is a sign of this kind of resilience. For this to turn it down in the middle of war, okay, at 23 billion, it's remarkable. Next slide. So we're not quite experiencing in our portfolio whiz, unfortunately, but we have all these companies that are raising money effectively. Companies like Scopio that are figuring out new ways to do blood diagnostics. Companies like Adionics, which is doing the next generation of batteries, building a $400 million plant in America. Another example of how Israel is driving American jobs and American productivity by providing key technology. And companies like CytoReason, which is using AI to help cut corners in the delivery of drugs, not corners for safety, but in time and money. Today, to develop a drug costs about $2 billion for a new drug on average, and they're going to cut that by 2/3 of the cost, which is amazing. So we just raised $80 million, not $1 billion, but $80 million for that company, with people like NVIDIA investing in Thermo Fisher and others. Again, this all happened in 2 weeks in July, just in our portfolio. Next slide. So the GDP in Israel has been growing, but it's affected by the war, clearly. We just saw today, it was announced that we're going over the budgetary limitations, going from 6 to 8%, which is not good. But if you see our growth in 22, the GDP growth was 6.5%, which is off the charts. If you look at the UK, they were 4.3. Germany was 1.8. The OECD as an average was under 3. So Israel, twice the OECD average in 22. Now, 23, everybody tanked except Israel. And you look at Israel, we still grew by 2%. Everybody else was flat. What's the reason for that? It's not technology. It's what Melanie was talking about, babies. We have a secret weapon, which is that we produce babies like no one else. And we are seriously into families. So our birth rate literally is about 2% a year. The Israeli population, we're adding every year. And this is something we should just broadcast daily into the ears of Hania and all these Hamasniks. 200,000 more Israelis net a year. And so that creates a certain underpinning of the whole economy, because they need apartments, and they need cars, and they need refrigerators, and they need jobs. And that continues to drive our economy. And what you see is happening now, and this is what's so crazy, is we're still projected by the OECD to be higher growth. Look at what Germany and the UK growth is projected in 2025, 1%, and 1.1%. And Israel in 25 is projected to be 4.6%, even during the second year of the war. God forbid that both will be over. Next slide. I'm not sure we're going to talk about debt to GDP ratio. Next slide. Sorry, next time. This is interesting. Our foreign reserves during the war hit an all-time high, which is unbelievable. Israel's foreign reserves are literally over $200 billion. And that's as a result of how strong the shekel has been. So a little bit of monetary information, because the shekel was so strong, for the longest time we were printing shekels and using these excess shekels to buy dollars to keep the shekel from getting too strong. Because when the shekel gets too strong, it really screws up my life. Right? I get money in dollars and I pay it out in shekels. So we had this little guy sitting in a printing press who's printing shekels. We turn the shekels into dollars. Dollars go somewhere. They go into our foreign reserves. And if you look at how it compares to other countries, it's very, very high. It's very much a bulwark of our economic security. Next slide. The attitude during the war was, we will not let the tech economy get damaged by the war. And there was a campaign around this slogan of Israeli tech delivers no matter what, which really became true. Next slide. I mean, this is Israeli tech. These four gentlemen work for me, okay, work with me. One is the head of business operations, strategic accounts. They're people who are working at our crowd. These guys don't look like your obvious commandos. Melanie knows some of these people. They're lovely people. But remember, Israel is a people's army. We have all kinds of types. We have the really muscular bodybuilders. We have very sort of nerdy looking, smart geeks. We have just normal people. We have all kinds. And what happened during the war is, unfortunately, the companies had at least 20% in many cases, certainly in our case, of their active employees at the war. Now, it wasn't everybody at the same time, but can you imagine like losing 20% of your workforce and multiply that by the whole country? And so that's why this slogan was so important. It's basically to inspire people to say, no, we're not gonna let this thing go under. We're gonna work harder. We're gonna do, essentially covering for our partners and our colleagues. And we're gonna do, we're gonna force men to do multitasking, which of course women know how to do much better than men. I'm sorry for that sort of sexist. It's not sexist, it's a compliment to women. But the bottom line is true. But the bottom line is that we made it happen. Now the problem is, it doesn't stop there. Because every employee has a son, a daughter, a brother, parents. Literally everybody's involved. And so the whole country is affected by this. And when you're, for example, a company of our size, and we have 500 portfolio companies, it gets amplified, where every week you're hearing about, oh, so-and-so just lost his son, or so-and-so's son is injured. And we, in our HR department, we were very, very focused on making sure that we support our workers, and those especially who were suffering from people who were being affected by the war. And then our head of HR had her son very badly wounded. And that's when, of many things that were difficult to handle, that was pretty tough for everybody. Because she had been this pillar of strength, and she was so positive, and she continued to be so. And despite multiple amputations, this boy is fine and is going to live a good life. But that's the war. Next slide. So during the war, we have been, I think, amazed by the attitude of the American partners, especially those multinationals that I spoke about, the 430 giants who operate in Israel. They not only did not run away or close their facilities, they continued to support Israel, both in words. Many of them set up campaigns to provide money for people who were evacuated. But most importantly, they wouldn't tolerate a second of this trash talking about Israel if it came from their employees. And so at Google, several dozen of the people that Melanie was talking about last night were trying to organize to get Google to shut down their critical cloud operation in Israel. You know what happened to those people? Fired immediately. Same happened at Microsoft. Same happened at Amazon. And guess what? You don't hear about this anymore. There are no more disruptions. These companies have been steadfast. And it's really been a great testament. Bill Ackman's my hero. He sort of had a little misstep on this IPO in the last couple of weeks. But what he did in the middle of the war is he acted. He's called an activist investor. And what did he do? He bought 5% of the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange. That stock exchange I showed you that was going up, he's also a smart investor. But he did something which we need to do more of, which is that we need to realize that in order for this to continue, we have to mobilize our resources in ways we haven't done until now. And there are a lot of billionaires who now have money they're saving because they've cut back their donations to Harvard or Columbia and places that were spewing anti-Semitism. And this money should now find its way not just to Israeli universities, so that we can send our best and brightest kids and kids of all kinds to study in Israel and make stronger ties. But we need to get everybody to invest. And it's funny that given how much money there is in Jewish endowments and Jewish organized capital, and I'm not talking about funds and hedge funds, because that's huge, but it turns out that there are about $200 to $250 billion of Jewish communal assets in America today. And there are Jewish communal foundations and various long-term family offices. What percentage of that money is invested in Israel? It's 1%. Less than 1%. And you ask them, okay, don't you want the investment philosophy and positioning of your organization to meet your beliefs are? And your beliefs are supporting Israel. And the strangest stuff comes out. They say, look, our mission is for charity. We can't take risk, excessive risk, by investing in Israel. We make money in the States where it's safe. We don't invest in Israel. Now, people will say this to me with a straight face. While Israel has been successful as a place to, and by the way, this billions and billions of dollars are being invested. It's not Jewish money. Okay, it's money coming mostly from big professional funds, the best in the world. Except the Jews, we're too smart. Okay, you know, I had an ongoing dialogue with Sheldon Adelson of blessed memory. He's a great Jew. The man, at one point, was the wealthiest Jew in the world. And he was the Sands company, gave enormous amounts to Birthright and to other projects. I would sort of beat him up and say, Sheldon, why aren't you investing in Israel? Because he was famous not to be investing in Israeli projects. And he says, I have a money machine. I put my money in my machine, out comes more money, okay, and I give it away to Israel. Nothing's wrong with that. Maybe he gets the pass, okay? I'll let you know what he did, because he did it right. But everybody else, you gotta take part of your assets and put them into Israel. And it's not necessarily this group, maybe it is, but we've got to talk to Bill Ackman's colleagues. Okay, and here in Aspen, there's no more target-rich environment where these people, you know, you bump into them on the streets. And it's shocking how little is yet going. We have a lot to do. So Intel announced back in December that they're going to put $25 billion more into a new chip factory in Israel. But unfortunately, next slide, it turns out that just a couple of months later, this is on pause. And it's not on pause because of Israel. It's because Intel, let's just say, is having its issues with cash flow. And that $25 billion is not available at the moment. So that's a piece of bad news, but God willing, we wish and tell well. They have, by the way, invested so far until now about 60 billion in total in the country. They have so much activity in Israel that we tease them with the notion that they should change their logo and make it Israel inside. Okay, but next slide. But we don't have Intel, guess what? We got NVIDIA. And it turns out NVIDIA, as you know, is such a hugely important company today. Even after the price of the stock has come down 30% in the last couple of weeks, it's still an incredible company. And it turns out that they bought an Israeli company, Mellanox, for $7 billion, which has turned out to be a very, very important part of their strategy. They employ 4,000 people in Israel, and 13% of their global workforce is Israeli. We have in our portfolio, hopefully, the next NVIDIA. Turns out NVIDIA makes chips that accelerate AI routines for both training and inference and learning at the data center. It's sort of a central computing depot. But the future is going to be putting this AI capability at what's called the edge, or the endpoints of the network. That could be your mobile phone. That could be your laptop. It could be your camera. It's your doorbell. And that's going to take a different kind of chip, and that's a company called Halo that, again, didn't raise yet $1 billion, but just raised $120 million in our portfolio. Next slide. And then we have a bunch here, which we'll talk about. So go to the next slide. This is a great story. This is a company called BioCatch, which is a cybersecurity company that tracks down bad guys by identifying with absolute certainty who you are in a new way. What do they do? No eyeballs, no fingerprints, no voice prints. But everybody who touches their phone uses it differently. The way that you swipe and hold your phone is different than this gentleman, is different than this woman. Everybody has an independent signature, believe it. And this product is now used by 200 of the world's leading banks, and it catches bad people because it knows what their signature is, and it reduces fraud remarkably. Company is now over $100 million in revenue, growing at 50% year to year, so that's a neat thing. And guess who came to party? The private equity guys. So this just earlier this year, we were very fortunate because we were investors from the beginning to sell a bunch of our shares to this group who paid $750 million to take control of the company at a $1.3 billion price. Except we decided to take half of our money and to roll it with these private equity people who were smart. Because why should we take it all off the table now? We gave people a great return, and now we're going to hopefully get a better return even yet for half of the proceeds in the future. Next slide. We also set up a fund at the beginning of the war to help companies, the little guys who were not making it, and we called it the Resilience Fund. We did it without charging fees and without charging carried interest, and we've actually helped about 40 different companies get through the crisis, and we're happy with that. The next slide. Oh, yeah, it's fine, you can go right there. There are issues that are problematic in the economy, and these are the three that are the most problematic in Israel. The construction and the agriculture industries are really hurting for what reason? The same reason. It's called labor. Palestinians played a huge role in terms of staffing these companies, or the farms, the construction sites. Palestinians aren't coming into work like they were for obvious reasons. And Israel had many foreign workers who many of them fled, okay, because the with there was like 35 Thai people killed in Aza working in the farms, and that scared many others off. We did not organize quickly enough to replace them, and so those two industries are in trouble. Now tourism, the whole problem is the flights. No flights, no tourists. Do you know how many Israelis are now stranded outside of the country because of all the flights? I just heard this number today, which is a scary number. 150,000 Israelis, in one way or another, they're talking about bringing boats from Cyprus and Greece. They've increased the flights by a capacity for 8,000 more a day to try to work this down. But it's a good time if you're making any bookings to Israel, book El Al. Delay your trip. Just the one thing you can bet on is that El Al will continue to fly. You know, foot. Okay, but United Airlines, not so much. By the way, Lufthansa and British Airways, bless them, are still flying, which is interesting to know. Go ahead. Now, there are definite long-term risks as a result of the activities on campus and the way that many of the next generation of elites are being brainwashed against Israel. And we have to figure out what to do. We are really at a loss. We're doing some things at the administration level. We're cutting back donations. We're fighting legally, except that we're not. I think we have to figure out a way to speak to their hearts and their minds. And in particular, what I think we need to do is to create massive programs of internship in Israel. Today, you need to come to Israel and be an intern the way that a generation ago, people came to the kibbutz to be a volunteer. You know, some people didn't stick, like Bernie Sanders, okay, was an intern or a kibbutz volunteer. But the reality is that all kinds of kids, Chinese, Indian, Jews, Christians, all kinds want to come to Israel because they know this story. You go to the business schools, they want to come and to be here. And I think if the community would organize, it'd be a great thing. Next. And finally, we have to worry about other kinds of fronts appearing. Mr. Erdogan has now announced that he's going to punish Israel the way that he's been involved in Libya and elsewhere. We'll see about that, but he did cut the trade ties with Israel, and there was literally $7 billion of trade, most of it from Turkey to us buying cheap vegetables and produce. We'll have to grow it ourselves. I think I'm going to stop at this point because I would like to ask you what's on your minds and questions. I have, a couple other slides, but I think I would much rather have this we're a small enough group to have it more interactive. And if there's any questions, if you don't have it, I'll run through the remaining 10 slides. Yes?
What is the trend among young, smart Israelis regarding staying in Israel to pursue their, technology careers versus just saying, hey, I can do this in the United States, and it's safer, and it's easier, and blah, blah, blah. Should that be a real concern for Jews in general?
I think always, except that we've always had it, right? The reality of Jews in Israel is, who was the first Oled to Israel? Abraham, Avraham Avinu. Okay, he made Aliyah. His was God-induced or, commanded. What did he do as soon as he got here? He left the country. He wanted to visit. You look at all of our forefathers. If everybody had stayed in Israel, we'd be a country of billions. Okay, but people left. Sometimes we were expelled, we were butchered. But the relationship is very important. So if you look at, for example, Silicon Valley today, there are about 100,000 Israelis. And I'm not saying it would be better for there to be more, but I'm telling you that many of these deals that are being negotiated have two sides speaking Hebrew. It's Israeli in Menlo Park talking to Israeli, in Rishon LeZion. Okay, and that's a good thing. And what's also good is that people go for a number of years to get seasoned. They go to learn English, to have their kids experience something different. And many of them, most of them come back. Many of them stay. And so the question is, what's keeping the bulk of them? Because the bulk are still in Israel. And what's keeping them is patriotism, love for the nation, what Melanie was talking about last night, which is just a firm belief in the future. Okay, in other words, many people in the world today are afraid of the future. And that's got to be the thing where we really take our stand and don't let them, lo lefached klal, as in that little song, which we teach our kids about kol ha'olam kulo gesher tzaro, the whole world is a narrow bridge. But the one thing to realize is lo lefached klal, not to be afraid at all. Because Israel is positive. Look at where we are. We're 10 million people. Literally, this coming year, we will pass the 10 million mark. When I got there were like 2.5 million people in the country. I didn't do this, but to watch what's happened to this country, the explosion of all of this. And what's interesting about these people, the ones who are the leaders, they can go anywhere. And they would go all the time, but they're not picking up and leaving. And the few who acted like idiots during the judicial reform protests and whatnot look like fools. And they've some of them ruined their career. There was one guy who was saying, I'm so angry at this government, I'm going to move my company's money outside of Israel. So he proceeded to take $100 million and he moved it to a bank called Silicon Valley Bank. Now he was lucky that they didn't, they paid it back, it turns out. But he doesn't look good. It's not a good look for him. And I think that people are incredibly positive about the long-term aspects. Look, we need better leadership across the board. I would love to start a campaign that says that all the 120 members of the parliament will sign an affidavit that they promise not to run the next election. I would call it mikir lakir, okay, from wall to wall. Everybody goes. It's not a political thing. It's just our leadership has failed us. And the people are strong. What the people have done is incredible. If you look at the young people, they're incredible. And I think that gives just an enormous amount of hope. I got 4 kids. I got 15 grandchildren. Thank God. And they're doing great. I mean, the 2-month-old, I don't know what she's doing yet, but the ones who are there are just doing incredibly well. So I worry about that, but I think that we'll be okay. Yeah.
I want to ask you about the banks in Israel. If I, for example, want to open an account in an Israeli bank, there's no chance, right? So you talk about investment, and you know that the banks are terrorizing. Do you know about it?
I know that the banks are terrorizing you. Look, they charge. There's a
charge in terms of this compliance.
Yes,
scared.
but you know where that comes from? That comes from the U.S.
I know.
I mean, you know which is attracting more money laundering activity anywhere is the U.S. You'd be crazy to try to launder money anywhere else. Okay, open up an account here. Okay.
The question is, what can we do? I mean,
You don't need a bank in this. You don't need a bank account in Israel. Okay, in other words, to invest in Israel, by the way, on our platform, you can put up to 100 different currencies. You can invest in, British sterling, Deutsche Marks, Swedish kroner, and we do the conversion. It happens immediately. Okay, you don't need an account. That's
For this investment.
for many investments. Now, I would like you to have a bank account. I've got a good idea. We've invested in a new bank. It's the new licensee. It's a digital bank, and it's called 10, and it's being founded and run by a guy who's a legend. His name is Amnon Shashua, who is the builder of Mobileye. And this bank, which is amazing, they give you Hakol Kalul, if you know what that means in Hebrew. It means all-inclusive. The Israelis, when they go on vacation in Turkey, they go to all-inclusive resorts. Just let me drink and eat, and they have events. And banking, the banks are so profitable in Israel. Our banks are very, very tightly managed and supervised, is the word, by the government. But they charge you significant amounts for each activity. So this bank says you pay an 80 shekel monthly fee, and we'll do all your banking. I'll give you a card, and you may contact me. 2 more questions, and we're going to let you get out of here.
So you mentioned that, for me that's a topic of interest. You mentioned that there's over 200 billion in philanthropic Jewish dollars in the US, and they're not invested in Israel. But I know that you care, so
what am I doing about it?
Yeah.
I'm here speaking. I was hoping I would find you. That's honestly the truth. I'm passionate about this. This is a fun job. I get to have people pitch me great ideas. These are wonderful people to work with. Many of them are doing really cool things for the world, and that's what I'm going to end with. I promised a little bit about real tikkun olam, okay, in terms of how you can do what's called a double bottom line. You can make money and do something good. But I think that's what we have to take the message to these institutions, that you want our investors to be proud of Israel. You want them to be connected, to help, to follow, to come visit the companies when they come to Israel, to send the kids as interns, okay? And you want the companies to not just make you a ton of money, which is great, so you can give more tzedakah and live a better lifestyle, but we want them to also help solve global challenges. I'm going to show you an example of 2 companies. Go forward, 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 more forward, too many slides. Forward, stop. Okay. This is an interesting example of something which you have going to ask a follow-up before I was.
I was just going to make a comment then.
Go ahead.
I personally, because that's a passion of mine too, I discovered that there's like a loophole with the donor advised funds. Anyone here who has a donor advised funds is sitting there doing nothing for years, when he could be doing the double bottom by saying, because they have the.
So you know what? Join me and let's work on a project to get these donor advised funds to include an Israeli investment option.
Yes.
Okay.
All sorts of levels of risk.
I would love it. So I believe that many of the solutions to the problems we have, especially with climate, but healthcare, food, are going to come about as a result of technology breakthroughs. And they're going to happen here, they're going to happen in Israel, but they're happening around the world. So we're actually investing in a bunch of really cool companies. And this is one, which is a Canadian company. It's appropriate for you guys, because every now and then you start getting smoke from these fires. And it's not just bad for your lungs, but it's really bad for the planet. The number of trees that were burned last year in the Canadian fires was about 30 billion trees. And we have only 1 trillion trees left. The world has lost 1 trillion of trees. There are only 2 countries on the planet in the last 100 years have increased their tree cover, and those 2 countries are the US and Israel. Everyone else has lost trees. So there's a huge problem in replanting forests. When you have 30 billion trees, you know, you think of that old movie Salah Shabati, which was showing Moroccan immigrants planting trees. Trees are planted in most of the world manually by a person with a shovel, and you put it in the ground, you put a little water. That's how you plant a tree. Except not anymore. So this is a company, actually a Canadian company, which I'm in love with, who now is very connected to Israel. And they shoot pellets from a drone at high speed, 60 pellets a minute, every second. And these pellets get embedded in the duff. They go about 4 inches underneath. The pellet has special properties where they put food for the tree, fertilizer, anti-rodent protection, because the rodents are hungry, especially after a fire. And would you believe that over half of these pellets actually become trees? And so you can now, at low cost and effectively, plant all kinds of trees. And you're going to hear more about this soon. And the final example, it's okay. Go just to the end. No, go all the way down. The blue-green, up there. Make that bigger, please. It's okay, they can see enough. This is a company that came to me with an Israeli company with an idea which I thought was so compelling, I simply jumped at this investment. They said that there's this horrible problem in the world called toxic algal bloom, which is the algae that forms on lakes and rivers because of excessive phosphate runoff, because of global warming, and it's killing the waterways. And last night you were talking also about sewage in the water. It bothers me. I love water. Every time I see a clear stream here flowing next to the streets, it makes me feel good. And I can't stand the fact that this stuff is killing the world's water. So they said, look, we developed a new technology which allows us to put a human-safe and animal-safe and plant-safe algicide on the lake, and it floats on top, and it causes mass suicide of this toxic bloom. And I said, great, let's do it. So people started paying them money to clean up these lakes and rivers. And then research came out saying that, you know what this algae produces? Methane. Go to the next slide. And it turns out that toxic algae produces between 7 and 10% of the world's greenhouse gases from this methane excess. So these guys now, when they clean up the lake, what happens to the algae? It sinks to the bottom and is forgotten about forever, is now sequestered. So they are literally doing carbon capture, okay, on a massive scale. And they just got their first carbon credit deal, where they cleaned up a reservoir in Utah and were handed $1.2 million of carbon credits. So I think you're going to hear a lot about, that's a triple bottom line. This is making money, cleaning up waterways, and cleaning the carbon out. Thank you for being so attentive, and I hope I get a chance to come back.